So, as you could possibly imagine, Dada art as a movement could not go on forever. That level of chaotic primal scream energy was bound to burn itself out. The international group of artists that were associated with Dada sort of convened and discussed their ideas and decided that they had potential to move on with something else, an idea that they called surrealism. That's where the surrealist movement came from. It was Dada artists who decided to call themselves this. They have that in common with the Impressionists. The Surrealists had manifestos and publications, and they believed in surrealism as the true nature of where art should go at this time. So what you see here, this sculpture it's surrealism in a nutshell. It does a lot of the things that surrealism does. It's weirdly perverse and strange and unexpected. It The way that it makes sense is only on an intuitive level and in a way that seems fundamentally wrong. It also happens to be an assemblage. It is a found object sculpture, a sculpture made with found objects that takes those objects as materials to build something new with them. So it's basically a taxidermied cup and saucer and spoon covered with fur. So, what the surrealists had in common was an interest in the subconscious mind. They were interested in the writings of Sigmund Freud. Now, we living in the 21st century, when we think about psychology, the idea of a subconscious is just like second nature to us. This is the idea of the mind that we grew up with. But the artists of this generation did not grow up thinking of humanity in those terms. They were raised to believe more of a Cartesian idea of what the human being is, the idea that I think, therefore I am, the idea that through conscious, rational, logical thought and effort, we could understand ourselves clearly and control our thoughts and actions, both individually and as a society. Well, as survivors of World War One and all that followed, these artists don't subscribe to that. They're seeing a lot more sense in Freud's ideas that tell us what we are as human beings is much, much more inaccessible to us than that part of us that is accessible to us. There's a part of our mind that is accessible to our consciousness, and there's a whole lot more that the consciousness cannot access. And that part, the unconscious mind, is filled with those urges and impulses that are deeply rooted in early childhood experiences and are difficult for us to understand and comprehend, and that we would not be able to grasp and accept if we could see what's going on in our subconscious. It's very dark. So the artists of surrealism, they believe that it is possible through art to tap into that unconscious and to use that sort of powerful energy of the unconscious to drive new art that is exciting, new and fresh and honest. So surrealists have something in common with romanticism, and that is that they are united by their ideas, not by their visual style. So what surrealists have in common is an interest in the subconscious. Visually, they go in a lot of different directions. One of the things that a lot of surrealist artists attempt to do is to somehow capture impulses that are not logical and planned, to do things that are spontaneous, and to do things that they don't edit later. So drawing spontaneously and sort of like building on these sort of gestural spontaneous drawings, that's part of how Paul Klee is building this painting that we have here. It's part drawing, then watercolor on top of it. He ends up creating something that feels strangely dreamlike and intuitive. Other surrealists practiced what you call automatic writing, that consists of writing as fast as you can and paying attention only to the word that you are writing at that moment. People would practice this until they got to be able to do it very, very fluently. And then the things that they would write would only make sense on a very intuitive level. They would be kind of chaotic. That's a way of trying to get the unconscious creative impulses to come out in as unfiltered a way as possible. They're also trying to tap into the imagery of dreams. And that's what we're seeing here in Dali's painting, The Persistence of Memory. So this painting is not a spontaneous painting. You can see that a lot of skill and preparation went into constructing this painting. But what Dali wants us to see here is imagery that he has captured from a dream state. Salvador Dali loved attention. He was a theatrical, larger-than-life kind of persona, and he loved to talk about his process. One thing that he said at this time about what his process involved was that he was trying to capture dream imagery. One of the strategies that he had for that would be to fall asleep on his bed with his arm outstretched over the edge of the bed and a fork in his hand, and he would fall asleep, and when he would fall asleep, his hand would gradually relax. The fork would fall out of the hand, clatter to the hardwood floor, and make a noise that would wake him up. And when he would wake up, he would take notes and sketches from what images had been in his first dreams in that moment. So that's part of what he's trying to accomplish here, to communicate through a painting a sense of what you can see in a dream, which is not compatible with reality. And because Dali is so skilled at making a painting that is naturalistic, that looks like reality, it creates a very unsettling effect. That's something that surrealists like to call uncanny. It feels like things are off kilter. They should not be this way. So Dali puts the viewer in a place where it feels basically like reality. There's gravity, there's a sky, there's ground, there's a horizon, there are mountains in the distance, things have three-dimensional form. Feels kind of like reality, and yet there are all of these things sort of scattered around in this space that are completely incompatible with real life. These melting watches. What makes a watch make sense? It is a measure of time. It's a measure of our experience of life because it works, it ticks out its time consistently. With a floppy watch, it can't do that, and yet somehow these hands of the watches are still moving. And there's one watch that, ants are crawling out of the back of it. In the center of the composition, you see this floppy, strange shape. Dali described this shape as a self-portrait. There are parts of it that look kind of like a face, but overall, it's very disturbing. So this is the uncanny in surrealist painting. Magritte had his own way of addressing the role of the dream in art and psychoanalysis. So if you went through Freudian psychoanalysis, you may be familiar with this idea from popular culture that a Freudian analyst wants to hear about your dreams. So the subject of analysis would sort of lie down on this couch and just try to describe verbally in as clear a detail as possible exactly what their dreams were like. And the analyst is taking these notes, and the job of the analyst at this point is to get the subject to be as specific and concrete as possible in describing what the dream is like, because these images, if the subject goes back and talks about those images, they're talking about symbols. They're talking about things that represent something bigger. In a Freudian interpretation, a horse in a dream is something other than a horse. A person who puts on a tall hat symbolizes something. A person who reaches into a purse symbolizes something. Everything symbolizes something in the Freudian analysis. And so a pipe is not a pipe. It represents something else. It's something bigger. There's a reason that that pipe is there, and trying to explain and understand that reason. That's the process of digging into the unconscious motives that sort of surface in the form of dreams. So that's what Magritte is getting at by saying this is not a pipe. In a dream, a thing is never just the thing. It's always more than that. But look what he calls it. He entitles this painting The Treachery of Images. When we look at this painting and see the words, this is not a pipe, it is clearly true because it is not a pipe. It is a painting of a pipe. And he's sort of suggesting that when we look at artworks, we're doing something that's very much like interpreting dreams. Because to talk about what an artwork does for us, the way that it makes sense, the way that it makes us feel, and why we react to it that way, it's very much like the interpretation of dreams, because we're trying to articulate something that had been intuitive before we tried to verbalize it. So it's a lot like the work of a work of art. What a work of art does is very much like the process of trying to articulate and understand a dream. There were other surrealist artists who worked in primarily abstract mode, and Moreau's painting here can sort of stand in for some of those. What you see here is a set of, it would be fair to call them blobs and scribbles because Moreau was actually really inspired by children's drawings. A lot of artists at this time, actually, including Picasso, were strongly influenced by children's drawings, really interested in this very fresh, original way of seeing the world that hadn't been told how to see the world just yet. So when Moreau is like drawing in these really basic sort of faces onto simple shapes and scrawls, he's leading us to think about how we experience artworks as shapes and colors and line areas that are in some way life forms. They have a way of interacting with each other and creating effects as if they had agency on their own, as if they had somehow come to life. So this approach to abstraction leads to further developments in abstraction a little down the road.